Good morning and good afternoon wherever you are. Thank you for joining us in this morning's session. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online, and also welcome to all of you who are here in the room with us. It's great to have you with us. Today's session is about joining up disaster preparedness and climate resilient WASH services. And our purpose in the session really was to understand how these two communities community of people who work broadly on resilience, which might include all kinds of aspects of resilience, early warning systems, nature-based solutions, all those sorts of things. And then you've got a community of people who work on WASH, water and sanitation and service provision. How are we coming together? Because there's such an urgent need for that as we're all facing the challenges of climate change, and communities need to build resilience, and water and sanitation systems need to build resilience. So we've brought together in this session people who are working on both of those kinds of topics, the resilience community and the WASH community. We're going to see what kinds of lessons we can learn from each other and what are some of the overlaps. So that's the purpose of the session. It's great to have you here. I'm going to, just to say a brief word of welcome, an introduction. I'm Lucy Stevens. I work for Practical Action. I head up our cities program, so I come from that kind of WASH community. Practical Action overall is a UK-based NGO. We work to put ingenious ideas to work so people in poverty can change their world for a world that works better for everyone. In this, as part of Practical Action, we work on a range of topics. One of that is the Cities program that I head up, where we work on water, sanitation, waste management, in particular for low-income urban communities. And we also have a program in climate and resilience, and we are part of a large-scale partnership called the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance. And today we're going to hear two presentations from colleagues of mine who will be online, who will tell us something about the work that we've been doing on flood resilience under that alliance, which is a broad alliance of about 13 different organizations brought together to try to build resilience to flooding. There'll be a bit of an urban focus, but some rural focus within that. So we've got two presentations, one from Senegal, one from Bangladesh. And we're also going to hear some examples of some analysis we've done of the situation in Kenya, in Western Kenya towns. That's going to be the first part. Each of those presentations will have an opportunity for some question and answer after the presentation. So if you have questions as we go through, if you are online, please put them in the chat and they will find their way to me to read out. If you are here in the room, we'll have an opportunity for questions after each of the presentations. Following that, we'll have a panel, and we've got people in the panel who are coming from those different communities, from the resilience community, from people from a more WASH perspective. So hopefully we're going to be able to bring those two examples together and see how we can learn from each other and what we need to take away to bring our sectors more closely together in the future. I had a bit of a moment of realization yesterday, and it was in the session where we had the fire alarm first thing in the morning. So I don't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing if people were here. We're not expecting a fire alarm this morning. If you're online, there was a bit of excitement yesterday because everybody had to evacuate the building for 20 minutes. So I'm really hoping that doesn't happen this morning. Bear with us. I'm sure it won't happen again. One of the things was that there was a speaker from an environmental movement, and they were commenting on how surprised they were that the WASH sector doesn't really mention the environment and the resilience of ecosystems as part of our discussions. And I feel like this is also building on that, where we had a session on climate resilient sanitation, which was looking at how do we make sanitation services resilient. So I think this is building on that conversation that we had yesterday. Just to get a little bit of a sense of where we are with those two communities, I wonder, I'm not quite sure if people can put their hands up or whatever online, but in the room, which people here in the room would say they were from a kind of WASH perspective? Their work is in WASH. Okay, so yeah, and people who would say that they come from a more resilience perspective. Wonderful. So we have, out of that, we have probably a bigger number of people who are from the WASH, but we do have people from the resilience perspective. That's fantastic. Hopefully we'll get some of that discussion and your perspectives when we come to the question and answer. Okay, so I think with that, we can move on to our first presentation. We're going to hear from Senegal, where we've been working in the city of Thiès, just outside of Dakar, which is prone to flooding. So we're going to hear from my colleague Alioune Ndiaye, who works with our flood resilience program there, to tell us a little bit about how we've been doing that and some of the tools that we've been using. I'm going to hand over to you, Alioune.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lucie. I'm going to share my screen. I hope that it's okay and you can see it properly. Okay, so as Lucie was mentioning, I am Alioune Ndiaye. I work for Practical Action as a project manager for the Zurich Flood Resilience Project here in Senegal, specifically in the city of Thiès. So I am going to present the main results regarding the implementation of the project with some aspect around water sanitation and wash services. So just to give you a little bit of context here in Senegal. So as a general trend in West Africa, Senegal also is exposed to high vulnerability to climate change, with some model predicting a decrease in terms of the amount of rainfall, but also some trend around some heavy rainfall and the occurrence of some extreme events generating a flood, and in a context where our urban areas are really characterized by a rapid and sometimes unplanned urbanization, with also the demographic that is also quite important. And that's really the case in the city of Thiès, around 70 kilometers of Dakar, which is really characterized by some important issues in terms of flooding, as I mentioned, with all these aspects in terms of unplanned urbanization and bringing some problems in terms of waste management, lack also of green spaces. And more generally also, this city is really characterized by some lowest altitudes, where the flood problems is really mainly concentrated there. And it's in this context that we are implementing the Zurich Flood Resilience Project as part of the Zurich Alliance, which is a multi-sectoral partnership really focusing to strengthen the community resilience. And you can see in this map where the project has been implemented so far. So here in Senegal, we are so far the only countries in West Africa where the project is implemented, and we started to work on it in 2021. But you can see that the project was really conducted in various places around the world with various partners, Practical Action, but also NGOs, some research structures, and some actors from the private sector also as well. So just to present you about this issue of flooding, the Alliance has developed various solutions around that. The solution are really focused on 5 capitals. By developing various tools, we have, for instance, the financial capital, regarding aspect around diversity of income sources, access of on other financial resources. All this aspect around this capital is really related to strengthen the community resilience. When we take into account the human capital, it's mainly related to increase of knowledge risk for our context around flooding, education, skills. The social capital around strengthening the social relationship and network at the community level to really promote some initiatives to strengthen the resilience. The physical capital, so around infrastructure, and also some aspect that are related really also to water sanitation and other wash services will be considered here in this capital. And the last one, the natural capital, and Lucy was mentioning the theme of natural solution, which is really growing and which can be considered as a complementary approach to some investment in gray infrastructure. So based on these 5 capitals, the Alliance proposed mainly 3 solutions. The first one that we consider here is a post-event review capability. It's really an approach that is used to assess an event that really occurred. For instance, an important flooding that had happened. And the idea is really to see, to make an analysis about what went well, what are some room for improvement that we can find, and some recommendation moving forward. The second tool, and this is also one of the most important, is the flood resilience measurement for community. I will present it more broadly afterwards, but it really allows us to assess the level of resilience in a community by relying on various sources or indicators of resilience. The last one is related to a flood resilience portal. For instance, here in West Africa, we have a French portal where we share various resources related to flood resilience based on countries in West Africa. So just to explain you more in detail with the flood resilience measurement for community, as I mentioned, it's really a tool that allows us to have a certain idea about the level of resilience in a given community. And with this tool, the idea is first to start with the data collection by using various methods. For instance, household surveys, focus group discussion, key informant interviews, but also by exploring some second source data. And you have various sources of resilience, as I mentioned, that we consider, in our case, 44, where we take into account various aspects around the 5 capitals that I presented. For instance, when we consider human capital aspect around education, also some aspect around, for instance, if we consider the financial also capital, some indicators around household asset recovery, and so on. And in terms of the approach after the data collection, the idea is really to move to a grading phase where we assess the different sources of resilience by considering various grades from A, representing a very good grade, and D in the worst case. And the idea after that is really to have an idea about the level of resilience in a community, and where we can really work on an intervention plan to try to improve a given capital or a theme in particular. So just also to present you the main sources of resilience, as was I mentioning, and the one really related to WASH and other essential services in the flood resilience measurement community. You can see some main sources, for instance, around flood waste contamination, water and sanitation awareness, flood safe water. So the idea with the FOMC is really to consider various sources of resilience. And here you just have some idea just around some aspects that are really related to wash and sanitation. Perhaps there will be need to improve it, to add more indicator related to that, depending on the context. And just to give you an idea also about the main results that we have regarding the flood resilience measurement communities, the data collected and analyzed. Here, for instance, you just have a look of the way that the result is displayed regarding the 5 capitals I was talking about for our case here in Senegal. And in terms of summary, what we can mainly highlight is that regarding the social capital, you have some lack in terms of initiative at the community level. Some communities really highlighted that it was not really involved also in local food management communities, or their perspective was really not taken into account. Regarding the human capital, that's where we have the highest score with a good knowledge of flood risk of community, but there was also some need around some training really to improve their capacities, really to their capacity to cope with flood. And around the physical capital, as I mentioned, that's where also we consider some aspect around wash services. There was also the highlight that there is a lack of water sanitation, in particular with some undeveloped neighborhoods, and also a need to really increase some key investment in terms of infrastructure, and also with approach around natural solution. Still, regarding the result, I wanted to really to present you based on 4 pillars of action that we consider around the theme from early warning system, urban planning, waste management, and natural solution. For early warning and early action, there is definitely also room for improvement. That's a way that the alert messages is disseminated to the population, because you have this lack of understanding for the population around how to really interpret climate information and the action to put in place. So that was really important for us to consider some action as part of our intervention plan to improve the early warning system at the community level. Regarding urban planning, as I mentioned, it's really an important issue. And what we are noticing is really a lack in terms of implementation of some measure, but also the lack of involvement of the communities. Waste management also is an important issue, as I highlighted in the city of Thiès. We face a really important growth regarding the population, and there are really limitations in terms of water waste collection and disposal. It's also important really to improve the community awareness about best practices to manage waste. And the last one is around the nature-based solution. As I mentioned, the investment is really focused on gray infrastructure. So it's really important at the moment also to promote some complementary approaches to reduce the flood risk, and mainly also by investing in nature-based solution. Just to finish, I wanted to give some perspective around the best way also to improve the integration of waste sanitation, waste services in resilience planning. Regarding the tools that I presented, the flood resilience measurement community or the climate resilience measurement community, because for the big alliance, we are really moving to consider other climate risk beyond flood. So the idea here is really to involve more the water and sanitation service providers as part of the FMC process that I presented, mainly also the grading phase, to really have their buy-in for our intervention plan. And for instance, here in Senegal, we did it when we work on our FMC by involving the national organization in charge of water sanitation. And also another aspect also that I mentioned is to consider additional indicators or sources of resilience really related to sanitation and essential services. And in this regard, the CRMC is really flexible, and it's possible to add some questions that are really more focused to a context or depending on our purpose. So thank you. I'm going to stop here and wait for any questions. Thank you. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Alioune. We'll have chance for a couple of questions. What Alioune has been really showed is that we have developed this tool that's been used right across the Flood Resilience Alliance, which both measures community resilience and is flexible to a wide amount of kind of discussion and community participation, but also allows communities to prioritize the issues that they want to take forward. Do we have any, I'm keeping an eye in case there are any questions from the online audience. If there are any questions in the room, we can take one or two now for Alioune. And while we're taking questions in the room, it's important to use the microphone so that our online audience can also hear us well. We've got one at the back there.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting presentation. Ernest Duran from the One Drop Foundation. Just wanted to know, how do you integrate more? I see there's a lot of human in this, right? In the framework. Is there any human behavior change in that? And how do you integrate behavior change? Because there's a lot of humans in resilience, right? Like being aware is one thing, but willing to change, it's another. It's very different.
You know, did you get the question well?
Yeah, I think so. So thank you for your questions. Yeah, when I was talking about the issue in terms of waste management, I particularly highlighted the problems in terms of population behavior, because even when we were doing the community engagement and our various surveys, the community was really the first also to point out their responsibility. For instance, sometimes with some bad practices, when I take the example of some of them, perhaps putting waste also in the canal, and they'll end up blocking the canal, for instance, during the rainy season. So for us, it was really important also as part of our intervention plan, really to consider aspects about that during our various training with the key representatives of the communities to highlight also this aspect in terms of change. But as I mentioned also, as part of our intervention plan, we really consider some training. For instance, regarding the early warning system, we organize a training in partnership with our National Met Office and and also a social enterprise really working closely with community in terms of improving the knowledge around climate information, and to disseminate also the alert messages more properly regarding the context. So we are really taking into account this aspect in terms of behavior change as well.
Whether it's working well and what.
Sorry, Lucille.
How well?
Yeah, I lost you.
Is the early warning system working so
far? I'm sorry. Can you repeat? I really lost the first part. The question.
Just the question is, how well is the early warning system working?
Okay. So thank you. So you know, during the presentation, beyond the flood resilience measurement community, I was talking about the post-event review capability, which is another tool developed by the Alliance. And as I mentioned, the idea was really to analyze what went well and where we found some improvement regarding a particular event. And it was here the case in Senegal, where we had an important flood problem in 2020. And when we were conducting this study, we really realized that there is some aspect around the early warning system that we need really to improve in terms of alert messages that were really not too specific to the area, the way also that was disseminated to the population, because generally it's just about some messages in French, and for the population it was also not the most appropriate support. So what we are trying to do in our area of intervention in Thiès is really to work closely with the National Met Office and a structure also that I talked about previously, working mainly in disseminating messages to communities. So we are using some various approaches, for instance, by sending some audio messages based on our local language, where we try really to explain the alert messages, and also to give some recommendation in terms of actions to take into account by the communities. And that's really for us a way to really improve the way that the early warning system at the national level is designed so far.
Thank you so much. We're going to leave it there. And yeah, thanks so much for taking us through that. I'm not sure that we always hear about these kinds of interventions as part of this of a WASH week. So great to hear about things like early warning systems. So moving on quickly, I had hoped that our colleague from Kenya would be able to present this, and this is a shared presentation that we've prepared between myself and my colleague Peris Gatogo from our Practical Action Office in Kenya. The context is that we wanted to assess the resilience and the situation of WASH services and their resilience and the impacts of climate change in a number of Western Kenya towns, so that we could think about how we would like to bring these issues together in the future. So it's just like an indication of where we think some of the issues are. What we know is that there are big and growing gaps in water, sanitation, hygiene in urban Kenya. You can see some of the findings from the when you filter down to the urban population from the JMP data for Kenya as a whole, and you'll see that between 2015 and 2022, although there's been some good progress on safely managed sanitation, there is an increasing number of people who are still relying on, who don't even have basic sanitation. That's largely because in Kenya, a lot of people have limited sanitation in the sense that they're sharing. But when we look at population predictions for the urban population, we can see just how many people will need to be catered for by 2050, and that gap is quite just highlights the scale of the problem that's going to need to be addressed. An additional 1.8 million people were already living in urban areas without basic sanitation between 2015 and 2022, and the challenge to 2050 is looking quite large. Climate predictions for Western Kenya are actually quite good. There's relatively good climate science. So the predictions for 2040 to 2060 depending on different scenarios, but they suggest that in that part of Kenya, some months will be significantly wetter. Each of these bars is a month, and where it goes above the line in blue, that means it'll be increasingly wetter. Where it goes below the line in kind of maroon, that means they will be drier than today. So what's happening is more extremes, more wet, but also more dry. So the situation analysis we did focused on low-income settlements across 5 towns. All the towns are rapidly urbanizing. Urban sprawl is really is challenging the capacity of local authorities to provide the population with adequate urban services. It's not always easy to actually get a real grip of the numbers of people in low-income settlements because of the ways that numbers are counted and who counts as urban or not, and what information the counties have, which is another problem when it comes to planning for those kinds of communities. We asked in the situation analysis to what extent climate change was putting pressure on basic services, and where people had experienced devastating floods or droughts, whether that was always or seasonally or regularly. We can see that in a couple of the towns where we've got circles in blue, you can see that you can see that that there were problems of flooding, and in other places water scarcity. So what we found when we looked at water reliability, how many days a week people have water in their water sources, we could see that there were really some quite severe problems. In one town in Kakamega, 41% of the population only had water 1 to 3 days a week in their taps. So piped water is not frequent, and the volume is low. Water in our wells is also reducing. But this comment from the utility kind of illustrates some of the problems. Between April and May, our operations came to a standstill because flooding submerged the pump house. So they're also facing high costs for electricity and maintenance and non-revenue water. So they're squeezed by both challenges of climate and challenges of the economics of running the utility. Sanitation is also insufficient and poor quality. A lot of places, people are living as tenants. They have shared sanitation facilities, but really one of the problems is how many people share a toilet. So we found that in 3 of the towns in the low-income settlements, over half the households were sharing with 5 or more other households. And as you would not be surprised to find, the condition of those latrines was poor, not regularly emptied. People saying that their toilets currently were in need of emptying. Insufficient and poor quality. And other issues that we discovered, and how that links to climate change: the floodwater overflows onto the streets, the sewage pipes burst, toilets overflow or collapse. And at the same time, the service providers, informal sanitation and waste workers, are working in hazardous conditions, but their contribution is not recognized. And the heat and floods, in terms of moving about, make their work harder. So when it comes to this, I mean, I was trying to summarize some of how the community and the community resilience and WASH are connected. And I think one of the things is that climate change is not the only, or maybe even the biggest threat to WASH services, compared with other challenges like rapid urban growth of low-income communities, failing infrastructure, and other environmental challenges that might be putting challenges on water resources. But climate change, we know, makes it harder for us to achieve those WASH goals of sustained access for all. So, as we were hearing in some of the sessions yesterday, what we do to strengthen WASH systems is also good for resilience. It helps to build resilience, but maybe we need to go further in embedding climate resilience in our WASH systems. And at the same time, having safe and reliable WASH is a key part of community resilience. We've seen that from Alioun's presentation, where those essential services are a key part of how we've measured resilience. But resilience planning needs to engage effectively with WASH actors, and probably at the moment it doesn't necessarily engage with those WASH actors. Like, does that resilience planning or those early warning messages, do they reach informal sanitation workers to alert them to what might be coming? I'm not sure that they are part of the picture so far. So what might some of those solutions be? In the left-hand columns, some of these are some of the things that might be done at a broader scale, and some of what practical action might bring to the picture. So if we're thinking from a WASH system strengthening perspective, we might want to do citywide inclusive sanitation planning, and we might want to support water and sanitation utilities to strengthen their systems. And I think what an NGO perspective can bring to that, along with a whole range of other partners, can be ensuring the poorest are central to that whole process in terms of neighbourhood planning, or some of what we might bring in boosting demand and CLTS processes in the urban area, or supporting the role of informal sanitation workers. Maybe similarly, if I asked, and we brought some of our climate and resilience team in, what from a resilience perspective might be some of the approaches, broad resilience planning like we've done there in Senegal, and sometimes some of that science to inform action planning. Although there's a lot of uncertainty, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about in our planning? And from that we can bring in we can move from analysis to locally led action, like inclusive early warning systems or the assessment and co-design of nature-based solutions. So that's all very well in theory. What is the context in Kenya? What might be the way forward? We know that there are a range of funders and initiatives who are working in Kenya. There are major programs that are happening in Western Kenya, such as USAID's Western Kenya Sanitation and Western Kenya Water Projects. UNICEF is working in the area. But there are at the same time fewer other kinds of funders working in the WASH space, and there is limited funding for this kind of urban resilience work. In the Kenya context, I think there's a priority that's given to kind of the severely drought-affected northern rural areas, which might maybe overlook some of the needs and challenges that will be facing these rapidly growing urban contexts. There's great scope for partnerships, but there's a need to try to bring that together. And I suppose one of the other contexts is that within the national determined contributions and the Kenya National Climate Action Plan, there is limited mention of water and sanitation issues. So in the way forward, I think what we'll be looking to work on with other partners as we move forward is those kinds of whole citywide partnerships and that national advocacy around getting the enabling environment right to include resilience. So I'm going to finish there. And maybe we can just take one or two questions from one question from the floor, and one question online if there are any. Okay, I'll just check to see if there are any coming online, and if not, we can get set up to see if Tamana from our Bangladesh team is there, moving to a wholly different context, but again thinking about flood issues. Just checking any more questions. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Tamanna, and if people think of any questions, we can also come back to them in the end of Tamanna's presentation. So, welcome, Tamanna, from Bangladesh, and over to you.
Thank you, Lucy. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. This is Tamanna Rahman from Practical Action Bangladesh, and I'm the project manager for the Zurich Flood Resilience Project. So I'll briefly talk about our flood resilience works, working with the rural communities, and also some way forwards, how we can work more on urban resilience, integrating aspects of resilience and climate resilient wash services. Lucy, can you confirm that everyone sees my screen?
Tamanna, yes, it's all good. We can see your screen. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So, as we all know that Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, and because of the changing climate, we are seeing recurrent climatic hazards, rising sea levels, recurrent cyclones, flooding, increased soil salinity. All these problems are creating pressure both in the rural and the urban communities. In the rural parts, there are people who are most marginalized and they are dealing with the climatic challenges, but there are limits to adaptation. So a lot of the rural people are now moving to the urban areas because they are losing their livelihoods because of the climatic impacts. And there is a projection that by 2030, 50% of Bangladesh's total population will be living in the urban areas. And where these people end up living, they end up living in the informal settlements and slums in the urban areas. But our city corporations or municipal authorities, they are not well capacitated enough to take the additional burden of the additional population. And also, if we talk about the investment in disaster preparedness and building resilience, there's 87% disaster-related spending goes into emergency response or reconstruction activities, and only 13% goes into managing the risks or building resilience. And also, in terms of Bangladesh, the local level planning is mostly focused on infrastructure development, and there is no dedicated budget for resilience building, disaster management, and disaster governance. So my colleagues already mentioned practical action. We focus on putting ingenious ideas so that people in poverty, people in facing situations like climatic challenges can thrive beyond the climatic shocks. So we have certain focuses, like we work on building resilient future. And so we understand the realities of climatic risks, and we know we have some tested solutions, and our experience of working with the communities for many years, we have developed some certain solutions both for the rural and urban communities. We have been working for early warning system that works for everyone, and we have decades of experience of working in the early warning system, and delivering rural and urban resilience is something that is very much related to the service delivery mechanism in terms of wash facilities, waste management that we have been doing in Bangladesh for many years. So if I briefly talk about what practical action in Bangladesh is working in the city areas, we have developed a very innovative model called MTR to Entrepreneur. So we have been working in different secondary cities and towns for many years to develop citywide sanitation planning. And we not only coming up with technological innovations, but how we can benefit the lives of the informal sanitation and waste workers, and how we can dignify their livelihoods. So this MTR to Entrepreneur model is supporting the informal waste and sanitation workers to become more resilient in terms of financial capitals and in terms of their social capitals. And also we are linking with the local government authorities, so our interventions are sustained beyond the individual project period. And now I will move to our work in terms of flood resilience, which we are implementing as a member of the Flood Resilience Alliance. So Practical Action is one of the founding members of the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, and we have been working in Bangladesh for over a decade in implementing the flood resilience project. And as a member of the Alliance, our vision is that floods have no negative impact on people's lives and livelihoods, and they can still thrive beyond these shocks and stresses. And we have this ambition of supporting 2 million vulnerable people and generating an additional 1 billion extra investment in reducing flood risk. So in Bangladesh, currently we are working in the district of Faridpur. Faridpur falls under, it's a south central district of Bangladesh, and it, as you can see in the map, it falls at the confluence of 3 major rivers, and there are also certain tributaries and distributary rivers, smaller rivers. So this area is highly vulnerable to flooding during monsoon, and also because of climate change, we can see there are quite frequent and intense flooding that has happened in the past years in this district. So as my colleague Alioune already mentioned, from the Alliance, we have come up with a very innovative tool called Flood Resilience Measurement for Communities. And this is a so-called 5C4R model, we call it. So we know this 5 capital, but we also have these 4R systems of resilience in terms of robustness, rapidity, or resourcefulness. And we have also come up with the 44 sources of resilience, which are grouped under the 5C4R, and we have the disaster risk management cycles. So the 44 sources of resilience are categorized under different aspects. So if you can see, for example, early warning system, in terms of 4R, it falls into robustness. In DRM cycle, definitely it is preparedness. And we have the 7 themes, so it falls under life and health. So what FRMC does, it is an excellent tool in highlighting the strength and weakness of the sources of resilience. And this is a very community specific. So for example, in Bangladesh, if we are working with 8 or 10 communities, we run the tool for each individual community, and we assess their resilience capacities under the 44 sources. And it is the community who actually give us their data through all the household survey, the focus group discussions, and we also do the literature review. And that's how we actually prioritize our areas of intervention. So when finally we grade the 44 sources, for example, in early warning system, we have seen that most of the communities, they got a grade of between C to D. For example, in terms of wash facilities, or in terms of governance awareness, their sources of resilience was very weak. So this is something which helped us to prioritize what will be our key intervention areas. So I'll briefly talk about our interventions in terms of early warning system. So early warning system is something that, as I mentioned, we work in the rural areas of Faridpur district, and it is a riverine island. So it's more like a shifting landscape, and it is very dynamic landscape because of the braided river system of Bangladesh. These lands are not something permanent. It goes underwater, it remains underwater, and some chores, which or the river shoal islands, they remain like, if the chores remain more than 9 to 10 years, we call it a permanent settlement. So this is a very shifting landscape, and it is very remote or hard to reach area. So in terms of early warning system, people living in these riverine islands, they are way beyond getting a warning for an impending disaster. So in Bangladesh, we already have 52 million people who are exposed to flooding, but a data from 2015 to 2020 shows that only 29% people received flood early warning. And when we looked into the data of Faridpur, and when we collected data through FRMC, we found that mostly they get warning, for example, from a television or a radio if they own one. Otherwise, there is no means for them to get the warning. So what Practical Action did in a participatory manner, they come up with certain interventions, because considering the literacy rate of the rural communities, they are not literate enough to read or understand a message. So we have come up with 4 dissemination channels. So one was localized early warning through voice messages sent via their mobile phone. And we have also established certain digital weather boards at the Union Parishad. Union Parishad is the lowest administrative tier in the rural areas. We have also developed an application which works mostly at the national and semi-national level, and it also links the communities at the local level. And we also have set up a pool of local volunteers who actually send the warning or disseminate the warning at the household level, door-to-door level. So these are our 4 dissemination pathways to reach the last mile in sending the warning, depending on the lead time that the Bangladesh government actually generates the warning. And the lead time varies between 3 days to 15 days at least. So we actually extract the information and we make it more contextual information and disseminate it through different channels. Another sort of intervention through FRMC, we identified that what are the weaker sources of resilience. So one source came out to be the water sanitation aspect. So during flooding, what happens? The flood water actually damages the households, the wash facilities, and this becomes a serious complex situation because people in these areas, there aren't much flood shelters, so people need to stay at their homes, but when their homestays are not high enough, so they just need to go to an embankment road or somewhere like a community infrastructure like a school or a hospital building. So there's no dedicated flood shelter. The only refuge they can take is like an embankment road. So through FRMC process and through community participation, although it is a traditional practice that raising their homestead on earthen mound in the rural areas, this is a common practice. So we tried to incorporate local ideas, and we also come up with some of our engineered interventions that how we can make the homestead more resilient, and also how low-cost water sanitation facilities can be built, how we can raise the platforms of water pump, or how we can make the toilets a bit more higher and make it resilient to flood water. So this is something we have been working with the communities. And also I talked about the institutional capacity building, and I also mentioned that the budget allocation for resilience building capacities there's less focus on building resilience rather than more on response and recovery in a context like Bangladesh. So this is also something we have been working with the local government to sensitize them that how best they can allocate budget so that they can actually invest more on resilience building so that the post-disaster losses and damages can be minimized. So I briefly shared our work in building resilience to flooding in the rural context, but as an organization and also the trend in the national trend, the global trend, as we see that a massive urbanization is happening and people are moving towards urban areas, but they are devoid of basic services, for example, water sanitation and hygiene. So this is something where practical action is currently focusing on moving our focus towards more urban areas. So if you can see in the right side of the map, we have strategically identified, also following our recently developed national adaptation plan. These are the 3 important areas which are most vulnerable to climate change. These areas are frequently facing the burns of cyclones. Salinity intrusion is a serious problem. Tidal flooding, coastal flooding, and if you see Faridpur, there is a problem of riverine flooding and riverbank erosion. And all this climatic hazard is putting up pressure on the service delivery mechanism. So if there are more resource dependence in these areas and the resources are inadequate, then it's putting up pressure on the city and municipal authorities. So what we are thinking in terms of in the 3 cities or 3 municipality or city corporation areas that we are planning to expand our intervention focus is we have identified and we have tried to do a risk assessment. And these are some ideas that we think that a merger of climate resilient wash services can be developed. So for example, groundwater-based solution to improve access to water for all throughout the year. So if you can see the district of Satkhira or Khulna, there is a serious problem of drinking water, and salinity is a major problem. So people really have to pay to to drink, to get water. And the water is also like they have to collect the water from faraway places. So what can be optimum solution to provide a year-round water supply services? Again, in terms of sanitation aspect, in the lower income settlements, sanitation is a serious challenge, and there are like communal sanitation facilities which are inadequate to a like densely populated neighborhood. So this is something where we can also develop some of our models like MTR2 entrepreneur that will like manage the existing system, and also it can come up with alternative livelihood option for the sanitation workers. In terms of drainage network, which is also a cause of serious surface flooding or urban flooding, for example, in the city of Khulna and Shatkhira. So during the monsoon period, it's like 3 to 6 months sometimes. Even in the city areas, it becomes waterlogged in many of the lower areas, because one of the reasons we identified is the blockage in the drainage network. So what are the optimum solutions? There are like gray engineered interventions, but what could be possible nature-based solutions to revive the natural wetlands and rethink our urban spaces to manage the overall drainage network at a city scale. This is also something we can think about. And also in terms of waste management, I already mentioned that working with informal waste workers and providing household solutions can also reduce the pressure on the city authorities. And in terms of urban governance and disaster risk management, because we have been applying the flood resilience measurement for communities tools, mostly in the rural areas, but we can also think about, as my colleague already mentioned, that we are thinking to add more climatic hazards. So we are evolving the tool from FRMC to CRMC, climate resilience measurement for communities. And these tools can be applied irrespective of any context to understand the resilience capacities of the existing communities and come up with priority intervention areas that we can work on. And also in terms of in Bangladesh secondary towns and cities, there is like less focus on developing a climate action plan or citywide inclusive planning approaches. Rather, we have focus on piecemeal approaches, mostly on infrastructure focus. So how we best can integrate holistic approach in managing the urban disaster risk and promote a better governance mechanism. So yeah, overall, I just wanted to conclude that practical action, we have been applying the community-centered resilience tools and we have great expertise in digital applications and global data set, and we have tested the tool in different contexts, and our work is highlighting that we are trying to bridge the gaps, like what are the existing challenges, and we are coming up with solutions. And also in terms of city aspects, practical action has been working in the water sanitation and waste management aspect. So there should be a merger with the resilience community and the WASH communities, how better we integrate the climate resilience aspects in WASH services. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Tamana. And we are running a little bit over time, so I have one question from the online audience who's asking, how about government ownership to implement the tool, and to what extent do we think that this can be rolled out amongst local governments would be able to use something like the FRMC tool in the future? Tamana, I don't know if you can take that question.
Yeah, definitely. So actually local government were very much involved in the FRMC rollout process. So when we run the tool, we mentioned that there are methodologies like key informant interview. So we actually involved the government representatives. We collected data from them. And also we do FRMC data validation workshops where we invite the local government. And we also have plans that if government needs certain data, and like if they are coming up with some new projects where they need a baseline data or a data, so we have a larger data set, and government can easily collaborate with us and access the data set. So there is no duplication of doing the same work. And also we are actually advocating for the tool so that government can also take it up and implement in any other areas. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. There's a couple of other questions online, so I'm going to have to leave them for now, but we'll see if we can answer them in the chat in a minute. Now, just as we're about to move into our panel session, I have a quick bit of a check-in with you all, because we have 2 questions in a Mentimeter quiz. So let's see if we can get this to work. If we can, yeah. So there is the little quiz. I am also, yep, so I hope that you can see that online as well. And I'm going to go to how that's looking on the screen, and you can still see the code and the thing. So really, this is looking at it from both perspectives. I don't know if you can still see the QR code, or you go menti.com. So, to what extent do we bring WASH into resilience planning or disaster risk reduction so far? And I would say we're looking like, at the moment, the answers are that it is only partially or inconsistently. I'll give it another moment or two, and we'll see if we do any better from the other perspective. At the moment, it's looking like WASH doesn't really feature that much when we do our resilience planning. I'm going to move on to the next. Where's my mouse gone? Can I do this? Okay, so hopefully you can go to the second question now, which is the other way around. To what extent is climate resilience part of WASH systems plans? I think, again, it's looking like, well, I don't know, yep, so far, consistently, but yep. But as a minor part of plans. I think in some places, we're grading ourselves a little bit better, like consistently, but it's a minor part of plans has got a few more votes, but still most of them are on only partially or inconsistently so far. I wonder whether, if in a couple of years we did the same exercise, whether we would end up scoring ourselves a little better. But I think that what this illustrates to me is that we've still got quite a bit of a way to go to bring these 2 communities together. So I think that brings us really nicely. We can close that. We can close that now. Thanks. We can go back to here, which brings us really nicely onto our panel discussion. So I'm going to welcome up onto the stage with me here 2 of our panelists who are with us in the room. So Shushi Vora from the Global Resilience Partnership and Helen from World Resources Institute. You're very welcome. And online, we are delighted to have Kobe Brand from ICLEI Africa, representing local governments, and David Nash, who is from the Z Zurich Foundation, who are supporters and funders of the Flood Resilience Alliance. So welcome, Shushi, Helen. What I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists just to introduce themselves with their role and how they're connected with this topic, maybe which of these aspects they're coming from. So we'll go 10 by 10. So Shushi, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me okay, everyone? Thank you. Hi, good morning. I'm Shuchi. I work with the Global Resilience Partnership, and at GRP, we're working at the intersection. We have been for the last 10 years working at the intersection of humanitarian development and climate change. And resilience is basically how people and places persist, adapt, or transform in the face of uncertainty, shock, and change for us. So it's much broader than bouncing back, and WASH does form a huge part of it. But I see us as largely climate resilience community, basically, coming from that side.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. And then let's see, Kobe, can you hear us online? And perhaps you can give a word of introduction as well.
Yes, yes. And what wonderful examples. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Kobe Brandt. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of ICLEI globally, but also heading up our work in Africa. So ICLEI is a members network of cities, about 2,500 cities around the world, large and small. And we share this common thread of working on sustainability, sustainable cities for our future. So working on all the relevant SDGs, but specifically we have a water and sanitation programmatic approach within ICLEI, Global North, Global South, but also very much, I think, working a lot in the climate space, where we are the focal point for local and subnational governments in the UNFCCC context. So both climate resilience and mitigation, but also climate access and climate security, etc. So the interface between water, nature, indeed, biodiversity, and climate is very strong on our agenda.
That's fantastic, and great to have you in our panel. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me as well. My name is Helen Wanjohi. I am from the World Resources Institute. I lead work on city resilience in Africa, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I think WRI is a research organization, so, muddling through the spaces of cities, water, climate, and everything else in between there. And I think today we'll be happy to share a bit more about that. Thanks, and back to you, Lucy.
Great, thank you. Very welcome, Helen. And our final panelist is David Nash. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Lucy, and good morning, everyone. So my name is David Nash. I'm the Senior Manager for Climate Change Adaptation within the Z Zurich Foundation. We've been working on this issue of climate resilience, particularly through the lens of flooding to start off with, but increasingly looking at other hazards as well. Since 2013, when I joined the team, so for the last decade or so, we've been focusing in on what is it that actually is resilience, and the relationship between resilience and development, as my colleague from GRP has mentioned, is something where we've also been working very strongly for those last 10 years. And alongside that, Practical Action has been a partner with us for an additional 5 on top of that. So we've had a relationship with Practical Action for a very long time.
Great. So now we've got to know who our panelists are. I'd like to come to Kobe first. Kobe, from the perspective of local governments in Africa, how important are they telling you the issues of climate resilience, and within that, how much attention do you think there is to ensuring that WASH services are climate resilient in those discussions that you're having with local government?
Yeah, well, firstly, these examples just show us how much needs to happen at the local level, and that a lot of action for this SDG in particular is happening and should happen at the local level. So climate change is already having a significant impact on WASH services in African cities. According to the World Bank, climate change is expected to increase the number of people without access to safe water by 250 million people by 2050. And by 2050, 1.6 and 3.2 billion people are expected to live in flood-prone and potentially water-scarce areas, respectively. So these numbers, both flood-prone numbers and water-scarce areas numbers, they are increasing quite rapidly. And this amidst rapid urbanization, especially if you look at areas like Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, etc. So extreme weather events are having a devastating impact on public health, with outbreaks of waterborne diseases being common, and other areas as well. We have seen this confirmed recently in cities such as Kilimani in Mozambique earlier this year, when it was devastated by the impacts of Cyclone Freddy, for instance. The World Bank Bank tells us that 9 out of 10 natural disasters in the world are water-related, and a higher incidence of extreme events poses additional stress to the sustainability of WASH services. Of all of these impacts will result in higher costs for delivering and maintaining climate resilient services, especially for local governments who are already cash-strapped and who often do not have access to funding either from national level or from the international community. So make no mistake, African cities are acutely aware of the importance of having climate resilient cities and are experiencing negative effects of failing to do so. Our cities need not only to adapt to a changing environment, but also embed resilience by design to enable them to respond to climate shocks. At ICLEI, we believe in the power of agency of our local and subnational governments, and indeed, most of the most powerful levers for change, including land use, spatial planning, and WASH services, are in the hands of subnational governments. According to the UNDR, every $1 invested in disaster resilient infrastructure saves $4 in reconstruction. So we must see investment in resilient WASH services, not as money spent or cash spent. It's an investment into the very future of that city or that town and its community. And also, again, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. From a pure economic perspective, climate resilience infrastructure in our cities has enormous potential to improve not only WASH services, but service delivery as a whole. And we know that there is a critical backlog in terms of maintaining just the existing WASH infrastructure that we have in many of our towns and cities. We see that even in a country like South Africa, where these systems are in a precarious situation at the moment. So we're advocating a lot more for scaled up action, clear mandates to local and subnational governments, multi-level governments actions, and also access to financing, more accessible finance solutions for local governments to take action on the ground for WASH for their communities. I'll leave it at that.
That's a really clear call for action and a call for the kinds of investments that are needed. Is there and that's definitely seems to be a need. Are there other aspects of support that local governments would value in achieving those things, do you think? And I think Helen's going to be itching to come in on this in a minute. But what other aspects of support?
Yeah, maybe I can just open the floor for Helen. Helen, we work very nicely together, and WRI actually identified a very interesting definition, I think around 2019, around what is climate resilience, what is water climate resilient, what does it mean? And maybe Helen could talk a little bit about, share that with us. But certainly our cities are asking for, and we deliver, like with partners like WRI and many others, we deliver such technical services around aspects like, what is water resilience in my city look like? What is it going to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now? So we have to do a lot of modeling based on available climate data, based on water data, etc. And then I think, they're also realizing that sanitation should not be neglected. So sanitation should not be the stepchild in these discussions. And I'm glad to see that it's not in this particular forum as well. But technical services, they want to connect with each other. They want to share and learn with each other. But probably by most, they want clear mandates from their national governments. They want policies at national government that enable them and support their actions. And they need to work with each other because water and climate, they have no cadastral boundaries. So it's not just one city at a time. It needs to be across cities and regions working together. They're asking for nature-based solutions and what those could be. And they're asking for investment cases, help them to make investment cases so that they can get to bankable projects, so that they can access financing, both internal financing within their countries, but external as well. And I think many of our external mechanisms are worlds apart from the realities of local governments, and that needs to be addressed. And we're hoping at the GF8 Assembly they are talking about that as well right now in Vancouver. So we need more accessible finance solutions, and we need more bankable projects from cities. So that's what a lot of our time and effort goes into.
Thank you very much. I'm going to switch up the order ever so slightly now, and I'm going to come to you, Helen, because I think this this feeds on so nicely from what Kobe was talking about. Helen, I know you've been working on larger scale plans to try to help cities in Africa to create climate resilient cities in Africa with a fund and platform to help catalyze some of the support that Kobe is telling us about. Perhaps you could touch a little bit on the vision for that and the reasons for that and how you're trying to bring people together to address some of these issues.
Okay, so really thanks once again, I think, for the invitation to be here. And for us, we look at it, just building on what Kobe said, that, Africa is one of the most rapidly urbanizing, regions in the world, yet where essentially when we look at water and, those kind of issues, for us, climate change is hitting us hard. And of course, in the shape of water, too much, too little, or too polluted. So I think for us, we looked at it from that sense and found that there were, three major problems. One, the fact that our cities were woefully underprepared, to respond to these risks in the form of plans. So they lack, that water resilience planning at city level. I think something that's been alluded to by all the speakers. But also there's a lot of activities happening by different actors, uncoordinated, and I think not taking the space of advocacy and of coordination that we could have. But also the third piece is the finance piece. The fact that cities, even if they had plans, even if there was coordination, if there's no money to go into this, then there's a challenge. And so for us, this birthed something called the Aqua platform. Aqua was just a bastardization of Aqua, right? But we did it as ACWA, so it's the African Cities Water Adaptation Platform. And so this built from work that happened in 6 African cities, where WRI and partners supported work in South Africa, Ethiopia, and in Rwanda, supporting 2 cities each, a capital city and a secondary city. Reason being, within Africa, while we have these big cities where these challenges in infrastructure are already embedded, the fastest urbanizing spaces are actually the secondary and tertiary cities. So I think we wanted to have a model where we could look at both and be able to address the issues in both types of cities. And so the Aqua platform is a coalition of partners. It's a complete mix. We have members like Practical Action, we have city networks like Resilient Cities Network, ICLE Africa, South Africa Cities Network, we have research institutions, but we also acknowledge the elements of equity, and we have grassroots groups such as Akiba Mashinani Trust back home in Kenya, who are a Slum Dwellers International affiliate group, and even cities themselves, such as the city of Johannesburg, the city of Kigali, smaller cities such as Musanze. So all that platform's aim is to create a space for advocacy and joint collaborative action around urban water resilience in Africa. But then there's the third piece, which is the finance piece. And that's the Aqua Fund. So the Aqua Fund, it aims to address some of the few issues. The aim of the fund is to raise up to 222 million in grant funding that then would be able to catalyze another 288 million in capital investments that would go into infrastructure projects within African cities. So ambitious to achieve by 2032. And the fund just targeted, we looked at a landscape of the issues that exist within the space and the areas that had gaps. And one of the gaps that was identified was that, there's projects that are high impact, they have high resilience impact, but then funders shy away from them because they're perceived as too small, too high risk, too scattered, right? So the fund targeted the section along the value chain of projects from origination to funding. So targeting that origination, the project ideation, origination, project preparation phase as being the area that it would target. It would target, small to medium scale projects around in the scale of like 60,000 to up to maybe 5 million USD in the form of either, grants, repairable grants, or equity, depending on the scale of the project, by trying to aggregate them to standardize how they would be procured, so that it could take away some of the risk for the investors. So that's part of the work that's ongoing, part of the fundraising that's ongoing, and some things are already beginning to take shape. So I think we're really excited about that, but of course it's a challenge. And I think listening in the room, you begin to see that the second piece that I talked about coordination, is really critical, because we have two sectors here, the resilience people such as ourselves and the WASH people. And sometimes when the two groups are speaking, it's like they're speaking in two different languages, right? It's Swedish and English. And I think the really critical need of those two things coming together, and these two communities speaking to each other, I think, because the scale of the problem, as Kobe really eloquently put it, is so large. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Helen. And as you said, we really do need to bring these communities together, and I think that's what you're aiming to do with the platform, and to give us spaces to talk and to create things, and the actual solutions on the ground, and channel finance in a coordinated way. So turning to Shishi there, coming from that resilience community, I hope you feel at home in a more WASH-dominated space here at World Water Week. Not too much out of your comfort zone, I'm sure, not too much. But it would be great to hear how much you think that the sort of resilience sector thinks about WASH issues, but also what are some of the kind of lessons that have really emerged out of that resilience community that you think in the WASH sector we need to hear more clearly, and so we don't end up reinventing the wheel.
Absolutely. And I mean, before I get into my answer, I started out as a master's student who studied WASH, and then moved into nature conservation, and then moved into climate resilience. So I've been a bit of everywhere. So yeah, pretty comfortable here. Anyway, yeah, thank you. Anyway, so yeah, so on your first question around how much does the climate resilience community think about WASH, I think the way people live and the quality of life and well-being is very much central to resilience conversations in the climate space. So GRP as an organization is a partnership, as the name suggests, and we have been working with a wide range of partners, including the Flood Resilience Alliance and Practical Action, WRI. I mean, everyone who's here is essentially also a GRP partner, and we've been working very closely to create that voice in the climate space on resilience, because the climate space has been dominated by mitigation, has been dominated by conversations around net zero, which are extremely important. But there is increasing recognition that just net zero won't solve our problem. We've already reached a point where we need to adapt, need to be resilient to changes that are happening. And we have systems that are fragile. We have systems and structures that are not nimble, that are not flexible, and that don't allow learning and don't allow movement as quickly. So yeah, so WASH very much falls in that intense conversation around well-being of people. And we have strong actors, strong partners like SDI, Slum and Shack Dwellers International, Spark from India, who have been at the forefront of the WASH sanitation movement, so to say. So and now they're increasingly at that point where they're talking about rights-based approaches to climate resilience. What does rights-based approaches to climate resilience mean? And so, yeah, so, I mean, it's not, we don't see them as two separate worlds, essentially, is my answer to that. And in terms of lessons, I feel there are a few things that we've been doing which are extremely interesting. One, of course, is bringing this humanitarian development and climate change spaces together. And increasingly, so we recently hosted something called the Resilience Evidence Forum, where we felt a need that we aren't, like David mentioned earlier, there is a need to kind of bring these spaces together. We aren't really, and Helen also mentioned, we might be talking in different languages, and we really need to start talking to each other. And for that, we need to know what kind of evidence exists, who's using that evidence. Are we really, as quote-unquote experts, are we really listening to both what people need and what they know already? So changing those dynamics of how knowledge is brokered within these spaces of policy, practice, and research is where we were at with the Resilience Evidence Forum. And again, the humanitarian development and climate spaces, all three represented very strongly in that space. Secondly, it's that the WASH space, and this is, I mean, I'm being provocative here, but sometimes I feel that the WASH space remains static in the way, and this comes from the inside because I started out there, but I feel like we remain static in the way we are thinking about solutions. Solutions remain technocentric. Solutions remain within the small realms of how people's behaviors are adapting to that technology and picking up technology. And we're not necessarily thinking of, say, for instance, how cities are themselves living beings that are actually morphing and changing and continuously moving. And that's also something that earlier conversations, the presentations also presented in as issues that need to be dealt with. What's nature-based solutions for these cities? How are we responding through nature-based solutions? Do we have enough evidence for that? So on and so forth. So that's I feel like that's one part. And two, if we have very strong structures which determine the way power devolves down to people. WASH moves from a service delivery kind of a mechanism where we have funders, we have NGOs, actors who are acting in that space, and then we have beneficiaries who are at the end of receiving technology, finance, knowledge at that last mile. And we're not in the climate space. What we've been doing is we've actually been diversifying that voice and amplifying that voice of people. And I mean, I liked the presentations, something that Alioun said earlier in the presentations about how listening to communities and what they need and what they know is extremely important in the way we function. They're not just beneficiaries, they're partners in the process. And how do we create that inclusivity in the way we are designing these? And just a last point, we were founding signatories to something called the locally led adaptation principles. I heard locally led being mentioned. WRI was one of the founding signatories as well. And these are 8 principles that actually define how power and agency need to devolve to the local level. And it's not just power in the form of knowledge, but power also in the form of how investments are made, how funding it gets devolved in the form of patient funding, trust building, and how science and access to science get devolved so that people are decision makers themselves. What they need is something that they will decide rather than something that we decide in Stockholm or London or wherever, right? So yeah, I'll stop there. Okay. And thank you.
No, thank you so much. And I think that to be prodded a little bit to make sure that our solutions in the WASH space are not too conventional or static, where we can get sucked into a more infrastructure kind of lens is always a really helpful. It's always a really helpful reminder. Which brings us on to David. David, I know that the Z Zurich Foundation has been a long-term supporter of flood and climate resilience. And you've heard what Juji was saying about the need for adaptation and more dynamic approaches. Sometimes that's not that easy for funders to be able to build that into their support. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about why this is such an important issue for you and the foundation, and how you've been able, whether and how you can build in that kind of dynamic or adaptive essence to your support.
Thanks, Lucy. So there are a couple of things to say around the approach that the Zurich Foundation takes. One is that we started off on this journey thinking about it from a community lens, thinking about people, vulnerable people at a community level, and starting to think about what was impacting on their ability to thrive. So if you're starting from the perspective of how do people continue to thrive, that naturally leads you into a question around how the community itself works. And communities are complex systems. All the things that happen in the community are very interrelated. One thing moves, and that has both a known consequence and a whole series of unknown consequences that you just need to be aware of and trying to understand. And the approach that you've seen from both Aliun and Tamana showcased was this idea of an analysis with the community as to how their communities actually function. Understanding how they function under duress when they are hit by things like flooding is a great way of saying which bits of this community function and allow people to overcome the challenges that the community faces and to develop and to preserve those development gains and to move forward and therefore to thrive, and which bits are holding them back and get in the way of doing that. And that naturally leads you into a space where you're looking at a flexible an adaptive approach to your programming. So it doesn't go into it with a let's invest in wash systems or let's invest in livelihoods or let's invest in early warning. It goes into it with a let's invest in helping communities thrive. And when you've got that kind of broad perspective on what it is you're trying to do in the face of climate change, then you start to see where these things interact, and you start to see how you can look at things like wash services and say, let's not do that traditionally. Let's not approach that in the traditional way, because actually there's this other aspect that impacts on the wash services that if we adapted that, if we did it in a different way, we'd be able to tackle 2 or 3 problems at the same time. And the flood resilience measurement for communities approach, the way in which we've designed that, looking at the system as a whole, the analysis of the data that comes out of that tool is designed to say, where are these linkages? Where are the places where things connect together so that we can design interventions and projects that tackle things in a way that not only deals with the known consequences, but also tries to tackle these unknown consequences as well. And just to reference something that Kobe said earlier, that one of the challenges that people find in terms of building resilience is this whole issue of bankable projects. It's very difficult to get investors to stomp up money if there's nothing there to say that it's worth their investment, that the thing that they're going to do is going to actually lead to future success. And that's often because, until you get hit by a flood, you don't know whether or not things are going to work. So how do you get ahead of that curve? How do you understand that what you're adding will be beneficial if you're hit by a flood? In other words, you preempt the thing, you think about where those things go. And that's what this flood resilience measurement for communities approach does. It really does help us to identify the things that will add value, that are proxies for building resilience, that you don't need an event to be able to demonstrate that you're having an impact, that demonstrate how you're advancing the opportunity for communities to thrive and therefore become bankable. And once you get to get a list of, or a kind of suite of interventions that come out of that analysis, and that analysis incidentally done wholly with the community at a very participatory level, so it's owned by and meets the aspirations and the priorities of the community as well. Once you get to that kind of stage, then you've got a whole list of stuff that you can then start to sell to people from a investable proposition, and whether that's selling that to local authorities or cities that have some finance but don't know how to use it, or whether that's taking it to other funders to say, I appreciate that you don't want to have that whole flexible approach, But the analysis we've done, the thing we've created that's identified these projects, this is the benefit to you and why it's worth your investment. And that's what the foundation has been working on and working towards, is that whole kind of view that it starts at how you help communities to thrive. And that's where we come in from. I've tried to be quite quick because I know we're out of time.
We are pressed for time, so we are going to. I think we're going to have to wrap it up at this point. And I wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you in the room for your participation, and for people online for being with us as well. For me, I think there are some really key takeaways around that. In bringing these two sectors together, which was the point of the discussion here, there's a big need to make sure we've got that kind of adaptive management, that we can look broadly, that we can try to deal with some of the uncertainties and plan for a dynamic future systems, that we make sure we engage the right stakeholders, that these things are, that it's great that we've got partnerships across the board with grassroots organizations who are having a really strong voice in these partnerships, like the Akiba Mashinani Trust, STI, and so on. And so that those voices of the poorest people can be heard within both the WASH and resilience debates, because these are artificial constructs as far as the lives of people are concerned. But that we need to broaden our views about the stakeholders that we engage with on both the side of the WASH community and the resilience community. Please do feel free to follow up with us, LinkedIn or X, is it now, Twitter, whatever it's called, websites and so on to contact. And I'm sure you can feel free to find any of us later if you want to find out more about any of the initiatives and exciting things for the future that we will be taking forwards and hope to be talking about in the future. So thank you, everybody. Thanks very much for being here.